I'm just beginning the Boyne Camino trail, which goes from the centre of Drogheda, usually starts at St. Peter's Church. The Boyne Valley Camino is a 25-kilometre looped walk starting from St. Peter's Church in Drogheda town, with its halfway point being Mellifont Abbey. From there, you loop back towards Drogheda by old roads, woodland and riverside. It is one of a couple of points in Ireland where during the medieval period, people would have walked the ports to catch a boat to Galicia in Spain, where they would have continued on to Santiago de Compostela to visit the shrine of St. James. But I'm starting at Millmount Hill, a big yoke behind me there. And the crack with Millmount was that it was originally thought to be a Neolithic burial tomb, which housed Amergin MacMeilad, who was the chief Ullad of Ireland during his time. He was one of the original Milesian or Gael invaders of Ireland. They thought he was buried under this hill here. But I think they did archaeological stuff recently and they couldn't find any tombs or anything that signified there might be a tomb. But after maybe it being shut up lads, a Neolithic passage tomb. Jesus, the seagulls are fighting the crows. Non-stop battling up here for thousands of years, lads. After the alleged Amergin was buried in that big mound, it was then occupied by Hugh de Lacy, who was a bit of a big deal when it came to Norman invaders, and he built a big castle there and occupied this hill. And it was kind of an important place of defence ever since then. I mean, if Hugh de Lacy thought that was a good spot, he was a man who knew a place to put a castle. If you haven't seen Trim Castle, it's a good castle. So after the 12th century castle was built, through Cromwell's massacre of Drogheda town, which is a whole different story, this place was used as a place of defence and retreat. And right up until the 1920s, when this place became involved in the Irish Civil War, it was shelled by pro-treaty soldiers. Down there somewhere they had some mortars that they had got off the Tans, and they shelled the anti-treaty forces that were up here, eventually defeating them and forcing them to retreat out of here. There's another little marker just around the corner here from Millmount that's also a reminder of the Civil War in Drogheda, which apparently Drogheda was a hotspot. I didn't know this. It was a bit of a hotspot during the Civil War. Apparently the fighting here was just like common and frequent. It was right around here where the anti-treaty soldier Liam Leach was shot and killed by a sniper, and there was a plaque just there to commemorate his death. Liam Leach was patrolling with his comrade Harry Fairclough when Liam spotted a sniper and pushed Harry to the ground, taking a bullet and dying for his friend. Harry survived the war and passed the spot regularly, always tipping his cap and saying a prayer for Leach, until in 1984 when Harry tipped his cap and collapsed, dying on the very spot he had almost died in 1922. That's St. Lawrence's Gate behind me, and it was the east gate into the city. And it was the biggest gate into the town of Drogheda, which was a bit strange because it was a town that's vein ran from north to south, or south to north. But the reason why it was so big was because the top of it was used as a lookout point, and it was the only tower in the town of Drogheda where you could see the sea, whether it be dodgy looking ships or full-on invasions. It was a good spot to have to be able to see what was coming. I walked past St. Peter's Church, the official starting point of the Boyne Valley Camino, where you can collect your first stamp if you didn't forget to order your stamp book for the second time. Tracking from east to west through Drogheda town, I passed modern graffiti and ancient architecture. This 13th century abbey is where the Free State Army had set up their mortars in 1922. I followed yellow arrows to where the west gate once stood and began my walk beyond the outer walls. Jesus, that sun is so strong this morning. It's supposed to be a cracker of a day today. I think this is my 4th time doing this trail. Maybe the 2nd time successfully, hopefully. Because the last time I tried to make a video doing this, my son locked himself in our bedroom and I had to leg it home from, I was up near Tullyallen in the woods and I had to absolutely leg it. I ran like from there to the Battle of the Boyne Centre and got a taxi back to my house and had to bust my son out of a bedroom. So that video didn't go well, but it was raining that day and it was supposed to lash all day. Today it's supposed to be nice and sunny and we've taken all the keys out of all the doors in our house. So hopefully that will never happen again because it wasn't traumatizing for anybody in the least. That little cottage there that I walked past, I didn't want to be talking outside of it because somebody lives there, the windows are open. But the rock that was outside of it, that boulder, it's an historical boulder. But the 3 divots in it were supposed to be where St. Patrick knelt down and put his staff into it. The front 2 divots were his knees and the divot up the front where it was his staff. And it's been marked on like maps for hundreds of years. It's funny because you're just on this big main road that goes up to like a TK Maxx and a Woodies and all. And then there's just this like historical rock next to this old cottage. That little set of steps, see them all over the place in Ireland, especially around the countryside. And they're almost always outside old farmhouses, like the big fancy one there. And what they were used for was to get on horses. So the horse would be brought out, led up beside the set of steps, and then the old lord or whoever, the landowner, would come out and he would hop up on the steps and jump on the horse. God forbid he looked like a donkey trying to get on a horse. That's not a real cow. I'm just coming up to the Battle of the Boyne area of the Boyne Valley Camino. And this is where, it's kind of like a figure 8, this trail. And this is where, just up at that bridge there is where the crossover is. So it's a good point to note that if you need to turn around, this is the point to do it, because you can loop back and go down the boardwalk and the canal. Hello, little cow. At last I'm in nature and I can talk without being just slightly mortified. Being laughed at by men in vans and people on their way to work. Unlike my last couple of videos, there's no great narrative, there's no big story in this one. I'm just kind of out hiking and just looking at little spots and stuff that's around. The purpose of this Camino is to get to Mellifont Abbey, which was this Cistercian abbey of huge significance in Ireland, but it is not the ecclesiastical purposes of the now ruin that I'm interested in, but what happened there in the early 1600s, which I'll get to when we get there. It's amazing how cold it gets when you get into the shade of the woods. I passed a holy well on the way up there, just before I got into the woodland. And the last time that I did this, I was walking past it and I was just looking at it, and an old lad came up to me. He was 84, I think he said. He said, "Oh, you having a look at the holy well there?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Are you local? Do you know what the story is with it?" And he said, "I don't really know what the significance is," but he was like, "I made the stonework." I was like, "No way." He's like, "Yeah, he was a stonemason. He'd been a stonemason for 60 years or something." So I was chatting to this fella for a good 20 minutes. We started talking about history and what have you, because we were right beside the battle site of the Battle of the Boyne. He said, "You know that there's a campsite up in the glen there where King Billy, as we call him, where he stayed the night before the Battle of the Boyne." And I was like, I know of it, yeah." And he said, "I own that." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah." So he was like, "See that house up there, the hill there?" He was like, "That's my house, I live there." He said, I own all that land." He said, "That forest behind there where King William camped." He's like, "I own that." And I was like, "Can I have a look?" But I couldn't believe it. You just never know when you start chatting to somebody. I absolutely love getting out of the main roads. This is a really nice trail. Brings you through lots of little historical bits and bobs. And Drogheda town, it's the biggest town in Ireland. But I really like it. It's really medieval. There's lots of tight little alleys and awkward junctions that, you know, weren't meant for cars or buses or whatever. They were meant for horses and carts and people. Obviously the big church there, which isn't that old, it was built in the late 1700s, but it does house the shrine of Oliver Plunkett, and part of the Oliver Plunkett's shrine is his decapitated head, which is in a glass case in the church, which is mad. I've seen it a couple of times. You think you're just going to go in and be like, "Oh, that's mad, there's a head." But you walk in, when you see it, it's like, Jesus, that's a human. And it's like in this odd state of preservation, given that it's 370 years old or 340 years old. I'm not too sure exactly when he was killed. It was in the late 1600s. But if you're in Drogheda and you want to check that out, it's a very bizarre experience. Hello, doggies. Hello. You good boys? Barky boys. Can you imagine living in that house there? Oh my God. I don't think there's any better smell than the smell of a fresh gorse. a fresh gorse bush. Oh God, it smells amazing. It's just like sweet coconut. Oh, it's so good. Oh, and it's just, oh my God. I want to eat it. I want to drink it. That's the strongest that I've smelled that in so long. That smells so good. Oh, and there's a bang of cow shit. That's not as good. Hello. At last I arrived at the 12th century ruins of An Méanaiste Róir, the first abbey of its kind in Ireland, which at its height housed around 400 people. After the dissolution of the monasteries during the Protestant Reformation, a fortified house was built here out of the masonry from the abbey, and during the Williamite War in Ireland, apparently King William of Orange stayed here, using it as a base. Yeah. This is Mellifont Abbey. This is the destination that you're aiming to get to when you do the Boyne Camino. But you can tell the importance of the place just by the size of it and the architecture. But it is not the religious elements that I'm interested in here. This is where the Treaty of Mellifont was signed between A. Mór O'Neill, who was some man, and the Lord Deputy Baron Mountjoy, who was also some man. This treaty was symbolically important because it was seen as the beginning of the decline of Gaelic culture as it was then. The 9 Years' War, and not the massive European conflict that happened at the end of the 1600s, but the one that happened first here in Ireland. It went on for 10 years, believe it or not. It was one of the most successful wars that we ever waged against the English in Ireland. The Irish leaders were outthinking military tactics and strategies on a European level. The English were copying kind of what everyone was doing in the European mainland, whereas Ireland looked at what the English were doing and looked for weaknesses in what they were doing and used the Irish landscape to aid them in assaulting those weaknesses. We used bogs and forests to prevent the massive cavalry charges that were terrifying for the Irish. We never really had a good answer or defence against cavalry here. So we used the land to help us. But as well as that, we used quick-paced movements in gun warfare. We used lighter guns and less armour, so we were able to dart around faster and outmaneuver English armies. It was genius. There's so much good writing out there, especially by just three people, Ruth Canning, Hiram Morgan and James O'Neill. They're like the three people to read articles and books about the 9 Years' War. It's an incredibly overlooked period in Irish history. But however, it was the Battle of Kinsale that was the nail in the coffin, which was supposed to be a landing of Spanish troops in a sort of anti-Reformation crusade. The Irish and the Spanish got together, and their plan was to, if they had have been successful, like the numbers that the Spanish were throwing in Ireland, would have steamrolled the English. But some miscommunications, some missteps, the ships landed in the wrong place and the Spanish army were besieged in Kinsale. The Irish had to march across the entire country to try and lift the siege on them, but ultimately it didn't work out. So after the Battle of Kinsale, A. Mór O'Neill came here to meet Mountjoy and signed the treaty. O'Neill got off pretty lightly considering what he had done. Within the treaty, he managed to get himself a pardon, although it was detrimental to the culture of his land, which he managed to retain most of, excluding church land, I think. Within the treaty, he was forbidden from supporting Gaelic bards, which went against thousands of years of tradition of being patrons to the arts and the poetry. It was seen as just an important thing to maintain, which is kind of why we still have a reputation of looking after the arts in Ireland, because of that. Brehon law, which was the system of rule and justice and law that we used in Ireland for forever, he had to get rid of and introduce English law or common law. And most destructive, in my opinion, was the third part of the treaty, which was making English the official language in the lands which O'Neill retained. Because once you begin to lose your Tonga, your native tongue, you begin to lose your identity as a culture or a people, or however you want to call it. But in my opinion, that restriction of language was the most devastating within that treaty. Oh, my coffee's gone cold. Well, that happened here. Anyway, I've got to get moving. I have another 16 kilometers to walk. I'm on a bit of a schedule now. I had 5 hours to do this whole thing this morning. I have an hour to get home and I'm 10 kilometers away. I don't know about that. I've never tried fast packing before. This may be my first time. Hey buddy, you're a good boy. Hello. I'm currently going through King William's Glen, and I am on the west side, I think, of the glen, and it's just behind that house there is where the campsite where King William stayed before the night of the big battle. As I mentioned earlier, it's on private land. You can't access it unless you know the man who owns it. Before the battle here, King William had sent out some scouts to have a look at the opposing forces, the Jacobites, on the other side of the river. But when the scouts came back to him, he didn't think their report was trustworthy. He didn't believe them, so he insisted he went himself and had a look. I tried to look up exactly where this happened, and it's kind of, I don't know if it's known exactly where it happened, but so King Billy and a couple of his men, they grabbed their steeds and they galloped up to a viewpoint up here where they could look over the river and see what King James had in store for him, because it was William who had to cross the river. And when William got to a good viewpoint down here, it also meant that the other side could see him. Old Billy Big Balls had a picnic right in view of the opposing army. Him and the lads brought a few jam sandwiches. That's maybe not historically accurate. A couple of cups of tea. Sat down on the nice plaid blankies and had a couple of sandwiches and a bit of a rest while they were just staring at the other army and the army staring back at them. So the Jacobites said, Jesus Christ, is that William over there? So they set up a couple of cannons. They get them pointed at King William, who's just blatantly in open view, and they shoot a load of bleeding cannonballs at them. I think they killed one person who was with William, and one of the cannonballs hit William in the shoulder, I think. Nearly killed him. I think it was about here, somewhere around here. I think it was there. It could have been further down, closer to the river, but it was in this area anyway. The drastic difference that would have made in Irish and English history. From him just being like, I'll go and have a look myself. The Battle of the Boyne would never have been fought. I actually cannot begin to calculate the magnitude of difference in history that would have made if that cannon had it just been, you know, slightly more to the right or the left, whichever shoulder it hit, and ended William's life. Anyway, he didn't die. They fought the Jacobites. They crossed the river. They outflanked the Jacobites by a good margin, and they did a good job kicking the shite out of them. I'm just coming up to the bridge now, where you come back on yourself in the figure 8 of the trail. So I'm now heading towards the Battle of the Boyne Centre and the Obelisk Bridge, I think it's called. It's a cool bridge anyway. Some graffiti from 1962, 1939, 1952. This is sort of the last leg of the trail now, where I follow the last bit of the canal, which opens out into the river, and then it's just all along the river until I get back into Drogheda town. The canal opens out onto the Boyne River, a river that embodies Boyne, the goddess of the white cow and the lover of the Dagda, who you might remember mentioned in my Children of Lear video. She led me to my first view of the towering church on the return to Drogheda town. That piece of land across the river there, that's an island in the middle of the river. And there's a ford here somewhere, which would make sense because I'm beneath the M1, the main motorway from Dublin that goes north. So it makes sense that there was a ford here, but it's the ford that King William used to outflank the Jacobites. He whipped down here in his horse and crossed the river somewhere here. I guess beneath the river there's probably a build-up of stones somewhere. I can't see it now. Maybe when the tide goes down you can see it. Any of your names Fanula? I don't think it's them. Drogheda has been a town known for its graffiti since I was a teenager and before. Every year they have a bridge jam here where local and well-known artists do collaborative themed pieces. I finished the official trail loop at a very busy St. Peter's Church and made my way back up Mellifont Hill. Well, 27 kilometers later and I'm back where I started. Back at Mellifont Hill. I feel like you don't fully take 27 kilometers seriously when you start out. But it's not for the faint of heart, that trek. On a nice sunny day, I couldn't recommend it more. And it's nice to know the history of the little points where you're going along the way. And especially, I enjoyed Mellifont Abbey and just having that connection to our man more Nail. I don't know where the next video will be. It'll be somewhere in Ireland, looking at either numerous old things or maybe another story or something. Maybe an old rock up a hill, who knows? Slán go fóill, and see you in the next one.